Do you see things incredibly quick? I think we couch that as how do you process? I think the way that you process shows on tape. And I would talk about I guess, I know we're not comparing the players, but I do think it's a traits versus tape decision. I believe that Ty Simpson's tape is better. He doesn't have the traits that Fernando Mendoza does. And you are going to have to, as an organization, make the determination. Him not having some of those physical traits or starts, is that a yes or no for you?
Right.
And I can understand if you walk away saying, no, I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. The same thing that I said, but you're saying it better, which is, you check some boxes, and he doesn't always check all of those. So how?
Yeah, that's what you're saying. It the same thing that I said, but you're saying it better, which is, you check some boxes, and he doesn't always check all of those. So, how? Yeah, that's what I really want to isolate here is the whole traits versus tape. And I don't even want to get bogged down by the actual what do the traits show and what do the tape show, because, clears throat, I think that almost can set you up to get more confused. I think in this case it's kind of better to speak in the most general neutral way possible. I think honestly that facilitates a clearer discussion rather than really breaking it down as deeply as possible. You guys know I talk about this all the time, the different lenses and when it seems to make sense to zoom in and zoom out. And this is one of those moments that I think it makes most sense to zoom out and look at it through a significantly more general lens. So, let's just look at this through the simplest way possible, right? Clears throat, let's just use speed and the ability to go through progressions, okay? That on tape you see a quarterback like we'll just continue to use Ty Simpson and then Mendoza. You see Ty Simpson like on tape some of the things that he's showing, some of the reads and the decisions that he's making. I really like that is great, but the traits now I'm not it, so now it's I'm not seeing that for Mendoza, but not to the degree that I'm seeing that with Ty Simpson. And again, I'm not saying this is what I'm saying, this is a general statement, right? This is just a hypothetical in the simplest way. But I see Mendoza clearly has these traits. He has this speed and this power, and that it's not to say that he can't do the things that I like, the what I see on tape of Ty Simpson, but I just haven't seen it yet. And so it's just like, so what do I do with this? What do I do with this information? Because we've seen quarterbacks both succeed and fail spectacularly on both sides of that coin, where you see quarterbacks who tape are awesome because you have like tape purists who are all like it's all about tape. What do you see on tape? What do you see on tape? And you need more than that. You absolutely, because if it was just tape it gets broken down. Breaking down tape is such a science that I could only dream of being as good as some of these guys can do it. But it's an absolute science. But you need other perspective. It can't be strictly just what the tape shows, nothing else. It's more than that. And the example that I often like to use is like when you're doing actual legitimate research. You have researchers because you'll see it's a whole list of researchers that are all part of it. And you have guys that are specifically statistics, specifically the numbers, because they know how to understand the data, what regression models you go, like just the type of statistical analysis that you have to do to make sense of what you're seeing. Then you have other people that it's like, well, now it's my turn to actually interpret what I'm seeing. It's my job. You gave me all the data. I'm not great at knowing exactly what regression model to use and this, that, and the third, but once I have the data, I know how to interpret it. I know how to look at it. I know how to make sense of it. And it's why we often see people in public conversations kind of step on each other's toes, because you have people that don't really understand the numbers as well making comments. You have people that understand the numbers really well but don't know exactly what it all means trying to comment on what it means. And it's just like, no, this is why collaboration. And I've talked about this before, like I love Greg Coel's perspective because he is just taped. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else. He doesn't get involved in anything else. Just like I'm just showing you what the tape shows. What that exactly means, how you want to take it, how you want to interpret, that's up to you. I'm just simply relaying here's the data. 1 + 1 = 2. That's what we discovered. We found out that 1 + 1 = 2. What you want to do with that is up to you. What you want to do with that is up to you. And it is something. This is why I always talk about this as well. Like we know it's an art and a science with trying to figure out who's great with, going into the draft, etc., etc. Because if it was more of just a science, if it was really like the way how the combine tries to make it set up to be where it's just like, oh, you can jump really high and you can do, X amount of bench press, and then it's just like if it was really that straightforward, man, guys, you would just know who to draft there. There would be no buzz. Would be very straightforward. It would just all be mathematical. It would literally just be it would just be okay, we type this all into a computer and then it just gives us the answer. Got it? And it's not the way it is. It's not the way it works. It's an art and a science. And so it's a collaboration. And so we've seen quarterbacks that had flawless tape get into the NFL and it's just not good enough. And then we've seen other quarterbacks that have incredible, traits, terrible tape, or I shouldn't say terrible, just not anything special, and they go on to become incredibly insanely awesome quarterbacks, or you get too excited about the traits and believe that you're going to be able to, essentially get nicer film and they can't. You can't bring them up to speed there. And I don't even want to name names because even right now there's plenty of quarterbacks that have great film and it's just like but they can't get to that next thing. And then you have other quarterbacks again that have awesome traits. There's a couple of them still lingering in the NFL that people are just like the traits are through the roof. If we can just get the other stuff caught up, you have the next Mahomes. Like that's the obsession with chasing traits, especially is that, oh my goodness, if we can just get part of the tape to look good. We got it. We got it. And that was the conversation that I had a lot with like AR with the Colts. It was just like he does some things where you're just like, that might have been one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen. And you start to believe, oh my gosh, if he could just be a competent quarterback, like he's gonna be spectacular. He's gonna be unbelievable. And it's like, it doesn't necessarily pan out. Now, I'm not saying it's this extreme with Ty Simpson and Mendoza. Like I said, I always emphasize this, like when you take extreme examples, they paint the clearest picture so you know what type of boundary, what type of frame you're working in, and then you go from there. Then you zoom in little by little, right? You look at everything generally in the simplest way possible and then you just continue to, get closer and closer and closer. But like this is where it's interesting because there are definitely people that are very trait-driven like Con Coward. Con Coward is very much like, I like the quarterbacks, big, strong, this, that, and it's just like, and I get that because that also matters, too, because there's other quarterbacks that can have great tape. And we've seen this so many times over the years. A lot of these like Bama-type quarterbacks and whatnot where you're just like, the tape is great. They do all this, but then it just doesn't quite translate into the NFL. It doesn't quite. In hindsight, people were genuinely concerned that Joe Burrow wasn't going to translate into the NFL. You remember that? They're like, well, he only really had one good year in this or that. And obviously he's been injured and all that, but Joe Burrow is obviously exceptional. And nowadays, the whole trait situation, it's like even. That is a bit of a moving target because it's like when you talk about traits, do you just mean speed? Do you mean power? Do you mean arm? Like it's like in that regard, it's like in 2026, what do we actually believe is important? Because Jared Goff has fantastic traits. I think he's the type of person where like the film is better than his traits. But I'd say he's got great traits. But when you compare his traits to, I don't even want to use the obvious of like a Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, although that would be legitimately night and day. It would be like you can't even compare. Kyler Murray more traits, although like a column would think he's a little too small, but like the traits are clearly there, yet Jared Goff's skill set I'd argue is so much more reliable and has stood the test of time in a way that the traits of a Kyler Murray simply have not. But with that said, and I think this is actually kind of a we walked in kind of to a decent example here, both of their liabilities, both of their issues, whether it be the tape or the traits for either quarterback, you see it hurt them. You see how it's hurt Kyler Murray over the years, and you've seen how it's hurt Jared Goff over the years. And so it's just what are you more what are you more willing to take a chance on? And now this is where it's interesting, where the whole idea that you can't teach someone traits essentially, but you can teach them, again I'm using this the dumbest simplest terms. You can teach them film, right? You can teach them what someone likes to see on film. That's both true and not true. And Kurt Warner has talked about this. I'll never be able to find it right now, but he talked about that there's a lot of conversations with quarterbacks, and he said this like last year. He said this like last summer, so it's nothing to do about any of these current quarterbacks, but he came out and said essentially like, everyone always says that, oh, you can teach him to throw, to do X, Y, and Z, and he's just like, I don't know why so many people think that you can just magically teach a quarterback to do some of these things. And I think it actually was more loosely around the conversations around like Justin Fields and like what can you do? And I might be getting this mixed up. It might have been actually 2 years ago when Justin Fields got to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm not positive. It was definitely last year or the year before that. And I feel like I remember kind of using it in a conversation around Justin Fields, and I feel like that's what he was commenting on, but he was just pretty much just like everybody all says like, oh, these are things that we can, that the quarterback can work on and get better at. And he was just kind of, he kind of just pushed back on that a little bit and was just kind of like, within reason, sure, but like, not as much as everyone's trying to pretend that you can. And I find that interesting because I don't have a strong frame of reference as to how much you truly can elevate as an NFL quarterback. As you know, I understand you improving your mechanics and whatnot and how you're going to want to go through your progressions and understanding, concepts and all that type of stuff, but when push comes to shove, if you're a legit outside of mechanics where your mechanics are or where we just change your mechanics, you're going to get better production out. That is just again by definition, it's just a mechanical thing, right? It's just literally like if you move your arm here, if you work from your lower body, like you're going to get more power. You're going to get concrete on 1 + 1 = 2 results. When you're talking about some of the other nuances of what it takes to be a quarterback, I think that's really hard to really have a strong frame of reference of like if you're a C, can you go to an A? If you're a B, can you go to an A? If you're a D, can you go to a C? Like where does that actually go? And again Kurt Warner would say not as much as people want to believe. Not as much as people want to believe. And that's why again I think it just really emphasizes the idea that it's an art and a science. It's an art and a science. Even Kurt Warner's opinion, who has that opinion? I mean it's Kurt Warner. The guy knows more about football than any of us will ever know. But yet like that is still an opinion. It's a very very informed opinion, but it's not the law. It's not the law. And that was what he's observed and what maybe he found throughout the course of his career. And he talks a lot that is very clear to me that he is talking very much through the lessons of the coaches that he's had over the years. And I love it because it's just very clear. It's just like pretty much like this is what I've taught. This is what I've been taught. This is what I was taught throughout my entire life as a football player, as a quarterback. And you can see every time so often that he talks, I see him just sitting listening to a coach telling him that. I just see it so clearly. And I do think though that when you want to become the highest level of expert on anything, you do need to go beyond that. A lot of times you do need to have even more information and not just your experience. And I do see lots of people, lots of ex-athletes who they have way more expertise than again any of us will ever have, but they also didn't continue to be a student of the game. They're just speaking based on what their direct experience and expertise is rather than understanding all the other things. You can learn from a coach such a specific way to play and a specific way to go about it and specific philosophies, and yet another team and another coach can have it completely different. And it doesn't mean that one coach is right and one coach is wrong. It's just different philosophies. It's different ways to go about it. Listening to Tom Brady talk about when you should be calling timeouts, essentially like in a 2-minute warning, was so fascinating. And I meant to remember exactly what he said at this point. I honestly completely forget, and I'm bummed about it. It was one of those things I was like, I'll remember this, and I'm like, oh man, now I don't. But it was like that's what Tom Brady was taught specifically. If you're up by 2 and there's a minute 30 to go, when you know essentially like when to use a timeouts if you're inside the 30-yard line, like it was a whole formula, and it was like, well, that's Tom Brady, right? Who are you to deny you? Who are you to reject Tom Brady? But it was like, but that's how Tom Brady was taught. And it's not hard to imagine that McVay or Andy or someone else teaches a completely different way. And it doesn't mean that, you can try to figure out which way is better, but it's just like, it's just there's many ways to look at it. And I think that's where you kind of find yourself in this type of situation when talking about these types of quarterbacks, that it just kind of highlights the messiness of it. And for me, I'm not super interested in trying to figure out who's the better quarterback, Ty Simpson or Fernando Mendoza. I find this the conversation that I just had right now, the more general, more kind of like how do we make sense of all these things? What does this all mean? I find that more interesting right now because I'm not going to be able to figure out who's going to be a better quarterback. I believe in Mendoza, and I've made it very loud and clear: draft Mendoza, draft Mendoza, draft Mendoza. But since I always want to understand things more, and I never come from an angle where I just think that I just have all the information, and once I reach a conclusion, I just now know how to move forward. I always leave the door open to be wrong. And I also just feel as though, and I think this is an important thing to be able to have, especially as an athlete, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know what you're great at, know what you're not great at. It is one of the most important things you can do as a player. Fundamentally, understanding what you can't do, not just what you can do. And I'm not going to be able to sit here and confidently tell anyone without a shadow of a doubt which quarterback is going to be better, have a better career, etc., etc., etc. It's just the actual paid experts can't even do it with a high degree with a consistent high degree of reliability and hit rate. They can't even do it. I'm gonna be able to do it. That's in that, that would be quite egotistical of me. So, I'm more interested in trying to watch the conversations play out, hear what they're saying, figuring out what matters, figuring out where there's potentially a limitation in their own understanding because they are looking at it through a very specific way. And then again, just a general conversation of how do we make sense of this right now? What is the appropriate way to go through it? And again, to me, I'm just always reminded in these types of moments of just how messy all of this stuff is. And I love it. I love the messiness. And we should all appreciate the messiness because that's what gives room for us to have all of these conversations. If it was so much more clear and cut and formulaic and mathematical, there would simply be no conversation to have. There would be no room for opinions or for room for interpretation. And then there would be no sports talk. And if there was no sports talk, what's even the point? But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about this continuing conversation about Ty Simpson, Fernando Mendoza, etc., etc., etc.? Like, this is what's really interesting because like if Orlovsky, and I know Raiders fans are not happy with Orlovsky, but like if Orlovsky was someone, because there's people like Orlovsky that are working for teams, scouts, GMs, whatever it may be, they could be a situation where there's talking to the Raiders and saying, draft Ty Simpson, not Mendoza. Draft Ty Simpson. And it's just like, it's fascinating to me. But let me know your thoughts. I read every single comment. So whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, it's getting some discussions. It's getting some fights. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here and absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build a sub that we all generally feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be a part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.